I'm Jennifer Campbell, creator and host of the Systemic Leadership Summit. Welcome to this session. And in this session, we'll be talking about the flow system, an integrated approach to understanding complexity, embracing teamwork, and shaping leadership systemically. Today, we'll discuss the flow system with one of its creators, and my guest for today has extensive experience in dealing with complex executive system situations that leaders and professionals across industries face in their organizations. And his name is Brian Ponch Rivera. Brian is the co-creator of the Flow System, founder and CEO of AGLX Consulting, a former F-14 instructor and demonstration team member, and current commander in the Navy Reserve. He is a Cynefin Foundations trainer and often co-leads complexity workshops with the co-creator of the Cynefin framework, Dave Snowden. Ponch has worked with the co-creator of the Scrum framework, Jeff Sutherland, and the co-creator of Lean Kanban University, and has led also several high-profile digital transformations. He often speaks at global Agile, Scrum, and performance conferences on the topics of high reliability, leadership, teamwork, and complex adaptive systems. Following the U.S. Navy's 2017 incidents at sea, Ponch put his civilian career on hold and volunteered to be a member of the 2018 Strategic Readiness Review Industry Best Practice and Learning Culture team, where he led engagements with academics and executives on the topics of complexity, leadership, teamwork, safety, and culture. As a result of his combined civilian and U.S. Navy experience and expertise, in early 2019, he was asked by the U.S. Navy leadership to help transform the Naval Safety Center using the same concepts propelling the DevOps movement. He is currently co-authoring a book on the flow system, where he connects scalable methods and framework. For example, mission, command, OODA loop, Cynefin, human factors, red teaming, psychological safety, Wardley maps, etc., to the Toyota production system and the Toyota way. Brian Ponch Rivera holds an MBA, an MA, and has a BA in economics. He maintains multiple project management and agile certifications and is a Scrum in hardware trainer. Brian lives in Virginia Beach, Virginia in the US with his wife, Allison, and their two daughters. And also, he's the only military air show performer to propose during a live demonstration. And he's here today. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to you, Brian. Thank you so much for being here with us in the Systemic Leadership Summit.
Hey, Jennifer, thanks so much for having me here. This is a real privilege. And that bio you read sounds like a guy I know, but it sounds better than when you put it out there than when I put it out there. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's an effect that I tend to have from my role as a summit host. And why don't we just dive right in? We're going to be talking about the flow system. And let's start off by what it is. So what is the flow system and what exactly is its purpose?
Well, that's a great question. So the simplest way to explain the flow system is it's really just a system of understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem we're trying to solve there is there's many, if you want to use a couple metaphors, islands of disconnected effort going on in organizations.
Mm-hmm.
They're pulling from case studies or case-based approaches. My friend saw this at this place, so therefore we're going to do it. Hey, I read this one book, we need to do that. What we need to do is have some cross-referencing to make sure that the practices we are using, the methods that we are using are authentic, that they're not just one-off things that we found over here and we're going to apply them.
Mm-hmm.
So the flow system to me is really about bringing a body of knowledge that's out there and understanding how to bring it together to build practices, methods, and approaches so our organizations can survive and thrive on their own terms.
Yeah. And so that's why I'm so glad that you're here on the summit, because we have similar missions in that sense to
Mhm.
create some more integrated frameworks and approaches that pull from different bodies of knowledge, where there's a more like a cohesive type of way of looking at solutions for problems in organizations. And so, how was it developed then? Because you just mentioned that it's not something that's a one size fits all type of thing and much more integrated. So, how did you develop and co create the flow system?
Well, it's an interesting story. So there's three perspectives on it. I'll give you mine.
Uh-huh.
Uh, for years, I was working with Nigel Thurlow, and as a mentor of mine, he kept asking me questions. Where did you come up with this? Where did you find this thing called red teaming? Hey, that might actually work over here, Ponch. We ought to try that over here.
Yeah.
And I kept pushing and pushing, saying, I know this works. This works, Nigel. And finally, Nigel was in a position to go, okay, let's do some of these things. By coincidence, when Nigel moved down to Dallas, one of his neighbors came over to his house to babysit his dog or dog sit.
Mm-hmm.
And that dog sitter had a son who happened to be a professor at the University of North Texas who
Hmm.
focuses on team science and complexity thinking.
Yeah.
So they had a conversation, and long story short, the three of us get together. And, just like any cognitively diverse team is going to have an amazing outcome, the three of us were able to put things together that have not been seen before. So
Mm-hmm.
you have the academic, you have an agile lean thinker, and you have this knuckle dragger in me coming together saying, hey, let's put all these things together and see what they really look like. And
Yeah.
we found some coherence in it. But the other thing is we had a very big network, a network on the lean and agile side, a network on my side with the high reliability thinking, folks like Dave Snowden, Sonia Blinyo from South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
We knew a lot of the right people, and we really, it started to attract a lot of attention that, hey, there's something here. In fact, many of the lean thinkers that are out there came to us and said, you guys solved a problem that we've had for years.
Yeah.
So long story short, it's just three people that happened to come together over time that worked on this. And we're not the only three, by the way. We are the three creators of it, but it
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's not going to stop evolving.
Right, right. And so what you're actually saying is that it's a product, or it's something, that a system that emerged from how you, the three of you, and everyone else who's connected, evolved
Mhm.
as a complex adaptive system.
Right.
That's the viewpoint that's also at the foundation or core of the flow system. And
Well,
so,
you would never expect the three of us to be together in any space, right? A
right.
former aviator, a PhD in team science, and then this little short man named Nigel. And I'm making a joke there because Nigel reminds everybody of Austin Powers. So
Yeah, and so these I really like how you explained how, from the unlikely combination of the three of you,
mhm.
that something so incredibly valuable comes to the surface. And I think that, isn't it true that with the flow system, this is also what you encourage when you work with it, to also let leaders in organization emerge these unique combinations of people and expertise and everything else, so that the organization can develop or disrupt itself in a
Mhm.
way that it wouldn't otherwise.
Right. We could spend the next couple hours on that right there. So really, complex adaptive systems is all about the interactions. It's not about the quality of the agents. It's how we actually interact.
Hmm.
So you think about this, and I'll give you a story I heard the other night about some Navy SEALs that there you can have a person that grew up in a trailer park and has a high school diploma engaging with somebody who went to an Ivy League school and
Yeah.
making a life or death decision on something in
Hmm.
combat. That's
Yeah.
that's kind of what we're talking about here. Is in your organization, no one leader can know enough anymore, and it needs to be the group coming together.
Yeah.
And when you think about cognitively diverse teams, they're
Hmm.
inherently unstable. And an analogy I use is when you fly an advanced fighter aircraft, that aircraft is inherently unstable. It's the interactions, a central nervous system within that aircraft that are keeping the different parts of the aircraft moving to keep it stable.
Yeah.
That way, when it's time to maneuver, like in your organization or an organization, that cognitively diverse team can maneuver within the ecosystem that it's in. So
Yeah.
it's all about the interactions.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm just thinking of the listeners and in terms of leaders and professionals who are watching this. So would you say that the flow system is applicable in all types of organizations or teams or industries or markets, regardless of what the complex adaptive system really looks like or how we name it? Or is it more of a flow system in certain areas than in others? Because you just said it depends on the interaction. So
Right.
is it dependent on the context it's in?
No, it's well, yeah. Things are going to change based on context, but if you think about it, anytime you have people working in teams with technology, which is just about any organization now, it really
Mm-hmm.
comes down to the flow of information, the flow of knowledge between team members and across different teams.
Yeah.
So if you think about working across silos, you need to have information flow, and the way we do that is we can use the analogies of different types of systems, metaphor analogies. We can use things like the constructal law, a first principle of physics that says all live systems, all living systems are flow systems.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter what type of context you're in. What matters is you have humans working together at some capacity or some level. And that's
Right.
where the flow system works.
Right. Right. Okay. And so suppose that I'm a leader in an organization and I
Mhm.
am dealing with certain problems or certain issues, and I talk to you about the flow system. Why would I want to use the flow system? In other words, what's the business case for the flow system, or are there situations where I should not be using the flow system?
Well, remember, you're not going to pull every component down from the flow system and go use it. We're going to use it as a cross-referencing approach to develop different, if it's a communication approach that you need
Mm-hmm.
or a decision-making approach that you're struggling with,
Yeah.
we're going to use that to inform your organization on how to develop that. So instead of coming in and saying, here's our 6-step checklist for planning, we're going to help you develop your own checklist for planning, if you will.
Yeah.
And same thing with effective debriefing, effective communication, monitoring, just overall collaboration.
Yeah.
So the problems that all organizations have are not framework related; they're human interaction related.
Mm-hmm.
And from my experience in the cockpit, we are taught to, how do you communicate with somebody? How do you plan together? How do you debrief together? But the moment you step out of the cockpit, you go into industry, they don't learn any of that. In fact, it's assumed that people know how to work in teams.
Mm-hmm.
And another part of teamwork is leadership. So that assumption is killing companies left and right. And if you look at the
Yeah.
World Economic Forum's data, you look at LinkedIn's data, IBM's data, it's all pointing to the same thing, that we need these soft skills, these human factor skills,
Mm-hmm.
these interactions, these business relationship skills, whatever you want to call them, but they are critical to the survival and growth of companies.
Yeah.
And that's what the flow system is really going to do. Now, there are times you don't need teams, and that's something that I think the Scrum community confuses all the time. Everybody needs to be a Scrum team. Well, now hold on a second. Not everybody works as a team.
No.
Not that they don't want to. It's their context determines if they have to be a team.
Yeah.
So we use the team science, which is actually built off of complex adaptive systems thinking, to inform that, as well as the Cynefin framework. So now we have this cross-referencing going on, where we can help organizations understand their context so they can apply the right team method, group method, or if they want to just work as individuals, that's fine too. It depends
Yeah.
on context, though.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, and as you're explaining this, we're touching upon the core principles of the flow systems, aren't we? So,
Mhm.
you mentioned the importance of the interaction. You mentioned the complex inductive system. So, what are the core principles? If you were to explain uh, at a deeper level what the flow system is, what are these?
Right now, the 3 principles are pretty straightforward. It's customer first. We want to look outside in. We don't want to look inside out. So get that control, if you will, that understanding from what's going on in the environment from our customers inside.
Mm-hmm.
That's number 1, customer first. Number 2 is make sure we're delivering some type of value to them. We want to make sure there's flow of value so we can maintain and sustain our customer base,
Yeah.
and actually grow it too. And the third and final thing, and I think this is what we're talking about more in depth here, and that's the triple helix of flow, where we take complexity thinking, distributed leadership, and team science and blend them together. Now, when we were developing the triple helix, I view leadership as a component of teamwork.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I think the reason we went and broke out distributed leadership is, hey, leaders don't always view themselves as team members, which is absolutely wrong. They have to be a team member to be a good leader. But we put it out there for them specifically because there are a lot of egos out there in the world that say,
Yeah.
hey, I'm not a team member, I'm a leader.
Yeah.
Okay, you're right. But guess what? They're one and the same.
Yeah.
So those three, the triple helix of flow, distributed leadership, team science, and then complexity thinking are critical in every organization.
Yeah, yeah. And so what I'd like to do is zoom into those three in the triple helix a little more,
Mm-hmm.
because like you just mentioned in that example with how you see yourself as a leader or what leadership actually is defined way differently from the traditional ways. Now, in this summit, in the context of this summit, we are used to shifting paradigms and really looking at it. And I'm just really curious at how you, in the flow system, in the triple helix, how you define these actually quite broad terms, how you use them, and how you sort of fuel them with meaning so that you can work with them in organizations. So
Sure.
maybe we can start with the complexity or with the complex adaptive systems. And
Right.
so what are the elements within that term or within that concept that you use in the application of the flow system?
Sure. So just the basics of understanding a complex adaptive system, which this whole thing is about,
Mm-hmm.
that's critical, right? That's you got to understand what a complex adaptive system is.
Yeah.
Sense making. There's a couple of approaches of sense making out there. How do we make sense of our environment so we can act in it? That's
Mm-hmm.
coming from Dave Snowden, who's part of this this whole event as well.
Yeah.
And then we get into a few other things. Um, Something known as the OODA loop, the observe, orient, decide, and act loop. Narrative is critical inside of complex adaptive systems, and a few other things. But I really want to focus on maybe just two or three, and that's the narrative, the OODA loop, and the Cynefin framework for
Yeah.
today.
Please.
So, in fact, it wasn't long ago where Dave and I hosted a workshop where we looked at John Boyd's observe, orient, decide, act loop and his Cynefin framework.
Yeah.
And what we discovered is they both have pretty much the same background, if you will, the same research from the 80s, a little bit in the 90s, and then Dave's been able to take a little bit further with the Cynefin framework.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're seeing there is some coherence in a lot of the sense-making capabilities inside of John Boyd's OODA loop.
Yeah.
So if you think about observe and orientation, that's really just sense-making. We look at how our human heuristics kind of affect how we observe things, our previous experiences, our cultural backgrounds or genetic heritage, the way we synthesize and analyze information.
Mm-hmm.
That all comes to play when we look at something. So if you take the story we started off with John, Nigel, and I, we had different orientations, right? And we're all looking at something differently. But the synthesis of that matters. Our sense-making capability came together, and that's how we created the flow system. So
Right.
using the John Boyd's OODA loop as a way to frame that.
Yeah.
Now,
Could we just pause there? Because the OODA loop somehow, what pops up in my mind, just as a comparison or as to put it next to it, is the traditional plan, do, check, act loop. So how does that relate? Because one is sense making and one is something else. So is that something that you run into often, that people sort of compare it to the plan, do, check, act, or?
Right. We're gonna dive in deep here. This is gonna be kind of fun. So John Boyd actually studied the Toyota production system and PDCA. In fact, we couldn't find a lot of notes about PDCA from John Boyd's perspective. But what we have seen is that many folks look at PDCA as a linear approach, and the OODA loop as a nonlinear approach. It doesn't mean one's better than the other.
No.
In fact, one can fit in the other one quite well. The OODA loop, the conversation we're having now, is PDCA is part of our decision-making process after we make sense using the OODA loop.
Oh,
So
okay.
it doesn't mean we throw things out. It just says, yeah, that's really valid in that, or in this
Mm,
context. I can give you a couple of contexts where it's valid.
yeah.
So we actually mapped out the PDCA. Not just we, but a few other folks have as well, including William Detmer.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at a theory of constraints background. So he looked at logical thinking process, the PDCA
Mm-hmm.
cycle, and then the OODA loop, and mapped them against the domains of the Cynefin.
Yeah.
And basically what he discovered was the OODA loop fits in every domain.
Right.
And that's kind of what we're looking at too. Dave Snowden's going to have another answer saying that the OODA loop really is about complexity. I'm fine with that. I actually love that answer. But these things all interact with one another. And again, the flow system helps us make sense or help others make sense of their environment so they can apply the right method.
Right.
And if you think about it, you walk into organizations that is doing PDCA,
Mm-hmm.
and over here they have a cyber defense side or cybersecurity piece that's doing the OODA loop.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing Scrum, which is based off the OODA loop, or they're doing something like the Lean Startup, which is based off the OODA loop.
Yeah.
You don't say, hey, you got to get rid of this. It's just, hey, those things work in different contexts.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the beauty about the complexity thinking helix of the flow system, is we can have these conversations when we compare it to existing methods that are out there.
Right. Right. That's interesting because what pops up for me is that way back when I was, amongst many other things, also doing creativity and innovation workshops, it
Mhm.
reminds me of the idea generating that sort of coincides with the OODA loop, and
Yep.
then the idea really picking and decision making, which is much more in the area of the Plan, Do, Check, Act. And so that's how I recognize it, that it's in different realms, but it just depends on where you are in your process or where you are
Right.
in the development of things or in the creation of things.
And one of my observations when I go into organizations is they do not know how to plan. And what I mean by that is there's no shared mental model of how the team plans. It's just we all get in a room and we start planning. There's no sense making going on there.
No.
And I know a lot of viewers are out there going to understand this or have examples of this. But when
Mm-hmm.
you're coaching a Scrum team, for example, and
Yeah.
you're 4 weeks into coaching a Scrum team, and you look back at the last 2 or 3 sprints or 4 sprints, there's a good chance that many people took vacation. They were out sick. Their kids had something to do. But nobody knew about that. Why is that? Because they don't know how to plan. They don't know that identifying a potential blocker to the flow of progress or the flow of information over the next sprint needs to be shared with everybody so everybody else can plan around that. So what we're trying to do is bring in the sense-making piece early and go, okay, what's happening in the next 2 weeks that we need to know about? What's going on tomorrow? And get that all on the table, and then we
Mm-hmm.
start planning.
Right.
So these are really simple things we could do to change the way we interact within an organization and actually change the organization as well.
Yeah. 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 Thanks for all these examples. This is this also opens up other doors for, at least for me, and I'm sure everyone who's watching also, in terms of how you can enrich current processes that you have in terms of team collaboration or trying product development or project teams or anything like that, where there's some components missing, and where you put that early in the process, which supports the sense making, which is then really good fuel for the planning phase that
Right.
is often not shaped so well. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's that connection from the complexity thinking helix to the leadership side, which is there's psychological safety in there.
Yeah.
We can't ideate if we don't feel safe. We can't bring up weak signals. We can't say, hey, I saw this yesterday or this is happening if we don't feel safe. So now we're starting to see the connection between the helixes within the flow system, and then we get
Yeah.
into team science, and that adds another level of this to this as well.
Mm-hmm. So can we move into those more as well? Maybe to start with the leadership, because what
Yeah.
stuck in my mind is the example you gave before of how leaders see themselves. And in other sessions in this summit, we also talk about that, and how a sort of reflective process on the role that you have as a leader is needed in order to um, step into leveraging the systems thinking component of the leading change that you're doing, for example.
Mhm.
And so, how you guide leaders in helping them see their role differently, and that big switch from not being part of the team or being part of the team.
Yeah. So first off, the leadership that we're talking about is not transformational leadership. I'm not going to go in and help the individual try to transform who they are. What I
Hmm.
can do, and how they transform an organization.
Yeah.
The data that we understand is 1 in 10 folks, maybe 3 out of 10 folks can actually do that.
Hmm.
2 out of 10 can actually be coached on some type of shared leadership, and the
Yeah.
rest you're going to be challenged with.
Yeah.
So we have many challenges in front of us with the way we think about management and leadership, and the simple explanation that I give from Admiral Grace Hopper is we manage things, we lead people,
Yeah.
right? So leadership means you have to lead some type of group, 2 or more people who work interdependently and adaptly towards a shared and valued goal. That's the definition of a team. So
Yeah.
anytime you're leading another person, you're part of a team. And then some other things to think about before we dive too deep in this. The higher you are in a hierarchy,
Hmm.
the higher the task interdependence,
Yeah.
which means you have to work as a team the higher you are in the organization.
Hmm.
The problem with this is our reward systems, the way we're brought up, it forces us to act like wrestlers where we fight against the other leaders in the quote unquote leaders of the organization.
Yeah.
And then we hear these things that, hey, our organization needs to do Scrum. Those guys down there that we contract, they need to do Scrum so they can deliver value really fast to the customer. They need to learn how to work together as a team. Therefore, we're going to put a Scrum framework on them, and magically they'll know how to do this. It doesn't work like that.
No.
So you actually have to learn teamwork and leadership and have it reinforced within your organization in your performance development, performance management approach.
Yeah.
If you don't have that, you're just going to waste your time. But
Hmm.
back to the question about leadership, the leadership we're more focused on, at least what I'm focused on, is that shared leadership. So when you take a new team member anywhere in your organization, and if you have them lead an effective planning process, everybody becomes accountable to them.
Hmm.
Uh, because they're leading the process. If they have a solid process that's informed by the flow system, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now you have this leadership moment where it's really about a bias for action or bias toward action. You're creating this in people. So people that may be a little bit more reserved who end up leading these sessions
Hmm.
end up building a bias toward action and become better leaders. So
Hmm.
it kind of builds on things that we coach throughout the flow system. So that distributed leadership piece is critical because my background in fighter aviation, we may have a mission commander, but
Hmm.
that doesn't mean any one of us cannot take the lead. We can all take the lead at any moment based
Right.
on who has the most situational awareness, which is part of sense making.
Yeah.
So if we're more aware of something at the moment, we want that person to lead in that particular time.
Mm.
So that's what we're thinking about, or that's the way we look at distributed leadership. Is it's going to shift based off who has the right information in that moment.
Right, right. And so, again, how do you introduce this when you work with leaders, for example? Because, like you said before, there's lots of big egos and
Hmm.
people who were trained uh, to treat their teams as something separate from them,
Yeah.
and who need to know it all and all those type of things. So I'm just really curious from the flow system perspective. How do you introduce this? How do you help people shift their paradigms around their roles?
You have to go slow and easy on this one, right? Because leadership is not a position; it's a role within an
Yeah, yeah,
organization.
yeah.
It's going to shift.
Hmm.
So we do understand that the research show the people that are in leadership roles have the same psychopathic tendencies as those people that are in prison. So we have to go slow and easy. The way we do it is through metaphor, analogy, storytelling,
Hmm.
finding something that we can connect to in that person's back, in that history of that person. Did they play sports at some time?
Yeah.
Do they watch sports? They play music? What can you tap into to have them shift their paradigm about their role in this complex world? And
Yeah.
that's how we can do it. We can't force it on anybody, by the way.
No, no,
Yeah.
no, no, and it's an ongoing discussion that we're having in this summit about, and part of the mission of this summit is also to help facilitate that paradigm shift.
Hmm.
And what helps, in addition to the things that you mentioned, is to also see that when you find yourself in a complex situation, where you know that it's impossible not to know everything, that there's actually that your team, because your team is also a complex adaptive system, that it's so much more likely that it can match the complexity level of the problem that you're looking at, or
Right.
the network of problems that you're looking at. And so, from a what are our chances of succeeding with this perspective, that also usually helps to see, okay, if you change your paradigm or your outlook on your role, chances of being successful with your organization or in your organization are much higher. So that's something that that we also add into the mix when we're talking about this paradigm shift in leadership. So thanks
Right.
for speaking to
No,
this, and the
you just
importance of
reminded.
taking it slow also.
Yeah, you just remind me of something. Is what's in it for the individual? What do they get out of this?
Mm,
And that's really what you're looking for, is to help them understand what do they get out of it. Are they going to be happier? Are they going to be less stressed? You know, they're going to find something in there.
yeah, yeah. I've had a couple of conversations with leaders in business, also in this summit, um, who said, actually, secretly, it was a relief for them not to have to know it all, and
Hmm.
that they could tap into their leadership team, and all of a sudden, there's 8 or 10 or 12 people or 15 people who whose brains are open yeah, to build new networks of solutions or networks of approaches, rather than everyone just staring at them.
Yeah.
Um, so, so yeah, thanks for speaking to the leadership part of that.
There's one other thing you just brought up, and I got to. So in our training, when we do training, we actually
Mhm.
show people that they don't know everything.
Yeah,
And what the way we do this, there's actually a couple ways. But one of the things we're going to want to do, or we do in training, is we make sure that we're failing in front of others, because
mm.
that changes everything. And then we
So
really
you as
focus on
facilitators, you mean?
not us, but the teams are failing. We make sure that the teams fail in front of each
Oh,
other when we're
okay,
coaching.
right,
Yeah,
right.
we will fail too. I failed in front of folks before. But and that actually is a great opportunity to stand up and talk about psychological safety, because
Yeah.
the moment you realize you don't know everything, you have to admit failure in front of your folks, your peers,
Hmm.
your superiors even.
Yeah.
And once you're able to do that, then that changes the name of the game. And that's really what we're trying to get people to recognize is, if you are in a leadership position and you recognize that you don't know everything, it's okay to
Yeah.
say that I don't
Mm.
know.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. Exactly. Let's move into team science, the third
Oh yeah.
helix aspect. So what do you draw from in terms of team science? Because there's a lot about teams out there.
Mhm.
And yeah, what's your take on that from the flow system perspective?
So I don't think a lot of people know that team science is actually a real thing. There's the science of teamwork, or team science. We went with team science, and remember John's background is in that.
Hmm.
When you look back at the history in the military, some of the things we've had, some really unfortunate things happen in the military. We've had things happen in 2017, late 80s. Even commercial airlines had a horrible string of incidents and accidents in the
Hmm.
70s.
Yeah.
What ended up evolving out of this, these failures, if you will, are realization that machines don't cause ships to run into each other, or aircraft to crash, or us to shoot down the wrong aircraft. It's actually us working in teams. We don't know how to do it.
Mm.
So the team science that we're talking about, and I think this is where a lot of folks are getting their science from, of teamwork, came from the military.
Yeah.
Everything from the size of a team, to how we communicate, communication brevity based off if we're working at a very towards a chaotic environment, um, and just the fundamentals of planning and briefing and debriefing.
Hmm.
But those really haven't made it out into many of the industries outside of high reliability industries, such as nuclear power plants,
Yeah.
healthcare, aviation. But
Hmm.
you're starting to see pockets out there. So if you look at DevOps movement, they're really pulling information from resilience engineering, which is built off of complex adaptive systems thinking.
Mm-hmm.
You look at safety differently, safety two, which is using a lot of ideas from complex adaptive systems. You make that connection back up to something known as high reliability theory, and you dive a little bit deeper in that, and you realize high reliability theory started on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier
Mm-hmm.
back in the late 80s.
Yeah.
So what we know about team science is evolving. What we know today is we know it's going to change over the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. But the fact that we're pulling from that is really different than the other approach, which is to go, I saw this work at one place, therefore we should do it over here.
Yeah.
That's generally what you don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Team science is, it gets into team cognition. It gets into how do you work in multi-team systems? How do you scale teamwork across the organization?
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, I mean, it's a fascinating world. And what I've seen in the literature over the last 10 years, it's changed.
Yeah.
What they were talking about a few years ago on effective debriefing is not the same way we're talking about effective debriefing today. So it is an evolving science, which is good.
Yeah. 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 And I wonder how it relates to, and I don't have an answer to that yet, but what I do know is that at least here in the Netherlands, one of the bigger sort of areas in systems thinking and systemic approaches is team coaching and team systems coaching, and which is very much focused on how do teams function as a whole, how do they function as the complex adaptive system, and
Yep.
how can we raise systems intelligence within a team so that the team as a whole can operate better.
Yeah.
And so I wonder what the connection is between team science and what team coaching brings to the table. Do you have any comments on that? Do you have any
I
thoughts on
do.
that?
I was at a complexity workshop with the U.S. Navy not too long ago, doing a
Mm-hmm.
few things,
Yeah.
and somebody mentioned something I was unaware of, and that's called the constraints-led approach. So it's
Mm-hmm.
based off of complex adaptive system thinking, and I think it's bigger in Europe than it is here. And what it is really is you don't make athletes go do something that's highly repetitive without it resembling what they're going to see in a game. So
Mm-hmm.
the constraints, you talk about constraints, we're putting the right enabling constraints or governing constraints on them,
Yeah.
so they can learn something and experience something that they're going to experience in the game.
Yeah.
And this is fascinating because we talk about constraints in Kinevin all the time. Same thing with team science. Creating any type of flow in an organization is about constraint management. So
Yeah.
that is very alive and well in sports. And if
Mm-hmm.
you start diving a little bit deeper into what's going on in and around us with esports, electronic sports, guess what? These folks are working in highly interdependent teams playing video games that are changing on them just about every couple of days.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's actually going to be a positive thing for our workforce in the future, because we have these folks that are not technically savvy working together in teams, and they're starting to learn from coaches that understand teamwork and
Mm-hmm.
team science.
Yeah.
So this field is going to grow rapidly
Yeah.
in the next several years, and
Yeah.
it's that connection to complex adaptive systems, the connection to natural science is there.
Mm-hmm.
So we're very excited to be part of that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Definitely.
Mhm.
Thanks for speaking to that.
Mhm.
And so we now touched upon the three main ingredients, or how would you like
Mhm.
to call them, in the triple helix. And
Yeah.
so what I notice is that as soon as we speak about complex adaptive systems or living human systems,
Yeah.
and we talk about approaches or frameworks or the flow system in this case, then there's always this question of how do we put this into practice? And so
Mhm.
just because the wording and the jargon becomes a little too complex to some people's liking, and they say, okay, so how do I work with this? So could you speak to that more?
Yeah.
What are when you introduced a flow system, I know that in the beginning you said, okay, if you needed a communication approach, then we help you to create your own communication strategy or approach within your organizational context. So yeah, how do I apply the flow system?
It's kind of like Fight Club. You don't need to talk about it, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
So no, when we're doing training, we're not talking about, hey, let's look at the flow system. We'll do that with a train-to-trainer event.
Okay.
When we're working in an experiential learning activity with a client or just anybody, we want to make sure that they're learning. One, they're experiencing something that they normally see in their day-to-day work.
Mm-hmm.
And two, that we're giving them things that will help them communicate, help them plan, help them build situational awareness, help them reflect, help them open up that communication, that flow of information and knowledge, so they can see that in an event. So we're not talking about flow system here. We're talking about, I'm going to teach you guys how to, very basic things like, do you know each other's names? Yeah, that's the easiest thing to teach anybody. Is once you have a name tag on, you can actually create a better flow of information between people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. How do you raise concerns in your organization? Now, how do you do it? What would you say to one other person that you just met that you have a concern? And we can practice that. We'll walk them through different techniques that we borrow from healthcare and aviation, and then we modify it based off of their context.
Yeah.
And then the basics of planning. You can see this. By the way, teamwork happens to be observable, therefore you can measure it. And when you walk in, you see teams work together, you can see that that person's not talking. You can see that 5 computers are up. You can see that nobody's paying attention because they're texting and all that.
Yeah.
That's observable. You can see that nobody knows what they're trying to do because they can't recite the objective or the outcome they're trying to achieve. They can't identify a common customer. These things are noticeable in every day. Anytime you walk into an organization, you can see that in every event that they're doing. So going back to how do we put this into practice? It's really, really simple. It's just giving them the tools to do the fundamentals of teamwork, building the situational awareness, the adaptability, the mission analysis, which includes planning and debriefing, and just building up that collaborative body of knowledge that they need to build bonds.
Yeah, yeah. And so actually what you're saying is, if I understand correctly, is that you put them in or you help them with a context that's very similar to their day-to-day sort of work. And
Sometimes, yeah.
sometimes. Okay.
So we're going to put them in. So we do some simulations that were developed for aviators, where we have people. We send people into space using these different consoles where they can't see each other's console, and they have to solve problems together. They have to communicate.
Okay.
And what they end up finding out is the lessons that they're using to fly into space are the same lessons that they apply or they're not using in their day-to-day work.
Right.
So it's all about experiential learning activities, the way adults like to learn. And remember, we learn more from failure than we do from success. So as facilitators, we're going to push them to failure, meaning we're going to change things up if we start seeing them gain some type of success in the event they're doing.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so there's also the reflection of, okay, we have our day-to-day work, then we have this situation, what are parallels in terms of our collaboration and functioning as a team, and what are things where we can improve, and then you help them with tools or methodologies or ways to improve the quality of the interactions, of their planning, of their ways of communicating together so that they can then use the enhancement of the skills in their team back into their day-to-day work.
Right, exactly. It's the thing that Dave Snowden tells us all the time is working with complex adaptive systems is really easy, right? This isn't I call it rocket surgery, by the way, but it's rocket science. This isn't rocket surgery. This is just we're humans. We've been humans for a long, long time. There's a lot of information out there on how we can work together. We're just not doing it. And we have to do it now. So the great thing about these approaches is they have changed industries, like commercial aviation. Unfortunately, those lessons that they learned in commercial aviation didn't make it down to the folks that actually put the aircraft together. So I'm serious. I mean, you think about it. They're in a very complex, tightly coupled environment with software where the flow of information isn't there, the flow of knowledge isn't there. They may not even know why they're developing something, which is really dangerous now.
Yeah.
So, and this connects to something else I want to bring up about the flow system. the foundation of the flow system is the Toyota production system,
Yeah.
where you get Jidoka and continuous improvement in there.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about Jidoka is people don't know what that really is. And I'm not the expert on it. Nigel is, but it's really about, automation with the human touch, making
Yeah.
sure the humans are part of the system.
Yeah.
And in this time of, everybody wants to automate everything. That's dangerous. It's really dangerous.
Mm.
So now we have other ways to help people understand that it's not just about human teaming. It's about human machine teaming. And by the way, one of the best models for that in the world is the OODA loop, and it's already being used for human machine teaming. So it's amazing how we can navigate around the flow system to help organizations out. And that's the beauty of it it's not going to tell you how to do something. It's going to say, here's the body of knowledge that you need to pull from.
Yeah.
Here's what the science says. Here's what our facilitators can do. Let them help you develop something that you need to execute on to be efficient and effective in this environment.
Right. Right. I'm intrigued by what you just said about the OODA loop being a way to facilitate the human machine teaming.
Oh yeah, this is awesome. There's orientation is the most important piece, and if you look at how to split up humans and based off the Cynefin framework and where are humans better at than machines, you can use the orientation aspect of the OODA loop to help determine that.
Yeah.
Because really, humans are better at synthesis than we are at analysis than machines. That's already inside the OODA loop.
Yeah.
Our cultural traditions are always going to be better than machines. Our genetic heritage is always going to be better than machines. So you can highlight those things that we know are going to be needed in the complex domain of the Cynefin framework, and those things that are going to be in the ordered side, in the complicated side, where you can find some level of repeatability.
Yeah.
Machines are going to be good at that, or really good at that, and humans are going to be exceptional in the complex domain.
Right.
So by knowing this, you can bring it all together and go, okay, how do we use human machine teaming in this new world? And by the way, the best research on that is based on the OODA loop that I've seen.
Wow. So that means that we need to have some more awareness in terms of where we find ourselves in which space. To go back to the Cynefin framework, where do we find ourselves? And instead of trying to fit the whole world in one or two quadrants, we need to know where we find ourselves as human beings who are able to function in complex adaptive systems innately, and what we can leave up to automation, which is not the same as automating everything.
Right. So we always want to be part of the automation process. We always want to know what's going on.
Right.
And you think about some of the failures in aviation recently. We can make an argument that the people that were involved in flying it were not part of the system. They didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
So we have to make sure that humans are part of our systems. And I've seen this with AWS. A few years ago, AWS from Amazon went down to the US and I think globally. And the first thing that was said out of Amazon is, we need to automate this because the human made a mistake. Oh. Wow, you're just creating more complexity by doing that. Instead of fixing the problem, you're going to automate it because clearly there's a human involved. I think that's a dangerous course to take. Is, hey, when humans fail, it's because of the system. And we're getting back to complex adaptive systems and design. The system that we're in creates the behaviors that we show.
Yeah.
So it's really not the human's fault for failing. Guess what? We're humans. We're going to fail a lot.
Yeah.
We have to create systems that make sure we take into account that there's a human involved, and that's it, or humans involved. And this is a big shift for many folks to think about how we design systems going forward.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going all over we're going all over the place on the capabilities of the flow system. I love it because
well, we're exploring, and I love the exploration. And I'm going to go in a different direction again and zoom out when we look at the flow system. And this may sound like a weird question. I'm going to ask you anyway. And that is, when we look at systems thinking and complexity and business, then usually when these type of frameworks emerge, they have a role in the bigger complex adaptive system of where we find ourselves in those areas and then some.
Hmm.
So, what would you say the systemic function is of the flow system?
I think it's more of informing us to make sure we're applying the right approach.
Hmm.
So all flow systems have to evolve over time. So no matter where we start, we need something that helps us evolve. And I think that's what the flow system will allow any organization to do, is
Hmm.
evolve their current practices.
Right.
Now, what we can do with it is we can inject. We call it um, interve- interventions. We could intervene in different ways to go. Hey, we're going to show you how to do this at this level, so you can start right now,
Right.
rather than let's wait until your system evolves over the next 5 years. No, we can show you how this works right now, and you can start at another point and evolve going forward using the flow system.
Hmm.
So that's how I see it working in organizations, as a way to inform leaders um, if what they're doing is coherent or authentic.
Right. Right. And when you say coherent or authentic, I also hear that as, um, are you using the flow system, or are you able to use the flow system in a way that supports the ability of your organization and everyone in it to evolve?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. That's a great way to put it. That
Ah.
is, yeah. So we want to, if you're not evolving as a system, as any type of system, you're going to die. So
Mhm.
the whole concept of the second law of thermodynamics: if you shut off your system, entropy goes crazy, and next thing you know, you guys crash. You
Yeah.
crash and burn. So
Yeah.
you always have to be connected to the outside world, which is key in the flow system. Is, remember, we're pulling from many desperate places out there to bring this thing together. And when I think about it, that's the flow system is an emergent system that looked outside of what each of us, the three of us, knew.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's going to grow. It's going to help organizations grow.
Mhm.
Um, People ask, "Hey, do you have any case studies on it?" Well, there's case studies on red teaming. There's case studies on human factors or team science. There's a lot of case studies on how these things work independently. Nobody, as far as we know, has brought these all together, and
Yeah.
that's why we're attracting so many thought leaders in the world to go, "Hey, we think you got it right." It's not
Mm.
perfect, right? And by the way, there's no perfect system. So the OODA loop's not perfect. The Cynefin framework's not perfect. The flow system's not perfect. Nobody has a perfect system, but
No.
we're going to evolve this over time, just like any organization needs to evolve.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, speaking of how this evolved and how the flow system um, emerged and grew, um, how would you say this emergence, this development of the flow system, how did that influence you and your work and your life?
Uh, I think it's always been in here with me, and what I mean by that is, over time, yeah, I came from I had a music background, a jazz musician in high school and college.
Oh, I
Joined
didn't
the
know
Navy.
that. That was not in
Yes,
the intro.
yeah. I don't tell a lot of people about it because everybody's like, "Can you play the trumpet for me?" No, I'm not going to do that. I'll embarrass everybody that plays the trumpet and myself. But what I've seen over growing up as an adult, if you want to call it that, is I've been exposed to different things. So I'm a generalist, right? I've been exposed to fighter aviation,
Hmm.
all kinds of interesting things in the military. But it's in my opinion, it's always been part of who I am. It's just the moment I stepped out of a high performing organization such as flying fighter jets
Hmm.
into the domain of working in software development. um, I, I forgot about all that stuff that I learned when I was younger, and said, well, this must be the way the world works. So these guys are doing this agile thing, this scrum thing. They know what they're doing. I'll help them out with that. And then I realized, wait a minute, they don't know how to talk to each other. They don't know how to work as teams.
Yeah.
We learned that. We were experts in that. But then you have to go back and figure out, how do you teach other people these skills that were pretty much burned into muscle memory for us.
Yeah.
And really, it's what's going on now with the flow system in me is I mean, I have to mature rapidly because I'm engaging with a lot of executives now and
Mm-hmm.
having these high level conversations.
Yeah.
It's making me a better person. I mean, there's stress involved with it because you know we believe it is a really good system to help organizations move forward in this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of noise out there too, and that's what's
Mm-hmm.
stressful about it. Is it's I tell my wife it's like I don't know what it's like to be in a coma, but if I was in a coma and I knew what was going on around me, but I couldn't speak up and say anything, that's
Right.
kind of how I feel about it. Is guys, we have a great answer. We have a way to move forward that is better than the frameworks you're using right now, or will
Mm-hmm.
complement the frameworks, or make the frameworks you're using better.
Yeah.
It's a little frustrating. At the same time, it's very exciting. Um, you know, I do know that running my own company, I'm probably not the best person to run my company. And it really, I mean, this is what the flow system teaches you is, hey, you know what? There are people that know things, can do things better than you because they have experience in doing it. Let them
Yeah.
do it,
Yeah.
and let them train you. You
Mm-hmm.
can't be everything.
No.
Not Nigel can't be everything. John can't be everything, and I can't be everything. So it's really about understanding our strengths and our weaknesses, and speaking up, say, hey guys, I don't get this, or telling my wife, I don't get this, I need help with this, or telling one of the guys that works with us and say, hey man, I would love for you to run the company. He's
Mm-hmm.
like, but you know everything about this. I'm like, I don't know how to run a company that well. I'm talking my own company, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
context matters, right? It's
Yeah, it does. It
yeah,
does. And I'm sitting here laughing, but I'm laughing because there's so many things that you're saying right now that I recognize.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
that's probably why I'm speaking to so many speakers like you
Hmm,
in terms of the field of systemic leadership and how that can add value and how that can evolve
right.
into, um, yeah, bigger and more complex clouds of solutions for people to tap into and to work with. And also, yeah, just what you're saying on a personal level. There's so many things that that you sense and experience when you're working on something that isn't that is integrating so many different viewpoints and adds
Mhm.
to the complexity of what you're working with. It really requires that you step up in your leadership and in your life, and that includes acknowledging that you don't know everything.
Yeah, yeah,
And so, in that sense, we're full circle when it comes to embodying what we're doing in complex adaptive system approaches,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
also in the flow system, as I understand you correctly.
Right, and I tell you, it's hard to fail in front of Nigel, and I've seen Nigel fail in front of me, and uh, John's probably the more reserved person on the group, but it we let each other down here and there, and but that's the nature of being a human, right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
part of the game. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. We have almost come to the end of our conversation, Brian, and I just wanted to ask you one more question because
Sure.
so many people are also witnessing our conversation right now. If
Mhm.
there were, if it was up to you, and if it's at all possible, because we covered so much ground today, if there's one thing that you would like people to take away from that conversation, what would that be?
I think recency bias is going to come into play here, but you got to look outside your context to find out what you don't know. Get
Mm,
outside the echo chamber, find out from other diverse industries, diverse people, what you can learn from them. And I think that's the biggest thing that the flow system has taught me is, yeah, where I came from doesn't mean we have all the answers, but you do need to reach out, find other contexts, and learn from them.
yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Mm.
Um, I really thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. We've
That was
covered
fun.
so much: the flow system, the triple helix. We covered on team science, complexity and complex adaptive systems, and
Mhm.
also distributed leadership and your view and experience with that. We've heard numerous examples of how you work in so many different contexts and help leaders. What I hear is you help leaders and professionals to improve their interaction and their effectiveness and their collaboration and communication, so that
Right,
they can work on their capabilities to evolve in the system that they are building or that they are part of. So,
right.
Brian, I just really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for being on.
That was awesome, Jennifer. I really appreciate you inviting me to do this. It was a privilege. But this is a great event that you have going. And again, I really appreciate being on with you today. Great questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
And to everyone who's watching, I hope that you enjoyed the conversation just as much as we did. And if you want to continue the conversation or talk about how you are shaping team collaboration or your leadership within your organizational context or maybe beyond, then please go to our online community space. Thank you so much for tuning in today. See you next session. Bye bye.